Welcome to the Mac for the Blind. This is the spring, holy cow, spring 2023. This is course number 1. This is all about your Mac and VoiceOver. This is going to be more of a lecture, especially in the beginning, and then, towards the end, I'm going to kind of screen share and hopefully make sure that you guys can hear a voiceover just to kind of give you some initial information. It's been kind of a great thing because there's a lot of new names that I've seen registering for the 6 courses this go around. I mean, obviously we have some of the regulars, and I appreciate your continued patronage here for signing up for these courses. But I had gotten some requests, and I've done a few recent lectures, South Carolina Commission for the Blind, and I believe it's the Tech Access Group, basically an overview of the state of the Mac and, the VoiceOver screen reader and how it, quote unquote, compares to Windows and JAWS and NVDA at this particular juncture in time. So let me first just say that I am not here to do the old-fashioned Mac versus PC nonsense. I grew out of that a long time ago. As a blind person who relies on assistive technology, I really try to be as reasonable and rational as possible when it comes to, what defines access, where we are as blind computer users. So the bottom line is that you use the tools that work best for you, or that might be necessary for you, specifically in a work environment where you have no choice. So I do instruct Windows. I want people to understand that I'm not going to be speaking from just a Mac fanboy perspective, an Apple fanboy perspective. I've used Windows since 1992. If those of you who remember the old Power Braille and TSI, I went through Slimware Window Bridge for a while. I worked with JAWS. I was exclusively a Windows user until JAWS became the only, screen reader, I guess you'd say. I mean, I'm not meaning no disrespect or insult to NVDA. I understand that product has come a long way. I just have not had the opportunity to extensively use it. But I still do Windows training for JAWS and some Braille for the state of North Carolina, some private clients, and for Helen Keller services. So I just want people to understand that I'm not just talking out of my backside when I go through this stuff and speak about VoiceOver, quote unquote, comparing it to Windows. So let's start with the Mac itself. One of the first questions that I am frequently asked, and I'm not like over exaggerating. I get this question by email, even occasional telephone calls from people who pick up my number. What Mac should I buy? It's always phrased in one way or another, but that's the bottom line. What Mac computer? I want to try a Mac out. I've been a Windows user for X amount of years. I'm really interested in trying an Apple product. I've used an iPhone. It really got me interested in VoiceOver. What Mac should I buy? So my answer to that question is not a simple one, because the bottom line is it comes down to your choices and your usage needs for the Mac. So let's just first define the difference between laptops and desktop Mac computers. So from the laptop perspective, at the moment, we have the MacBook Airs and the MacBook Pro lines. And the MacBook Pro line has the 13, and I think they are doing, I think it was 14 and 16, but I read somewhere I thought they were going to do a 15-inch model. One of the things I will say as a comment, opinion only, I am not I kind of subscribe to the Steve Jobs old school, less was better. I think that one of the problems that has happened under Tim Cook is that Apple has too many products that it muddies the water as far as like choices. And this is like with Mac and iPad, where you're not really sure what to buy, which model, because everything is kind of similar and there is even overlap. So that's one thing I'm not going to disagree with some people that have said that to me. But I'm going to try to kind of make this simple, and I'm not going to get into significant technical differences here. I'm keeping it simple on purpose. So a MacBook Air is pretty much what I think any average consumer, if they're, as far as a laptop goes, if you're only going to do internet, email, text, working with text, whether it's text edit, Microsoft Word, Pages, maybe you're going to do a little, music stuff, maybe listening to music, maybe you kind of mess around a little bit with GarageBand, maybe you do some light editing, something like that. You can get away with a MacBook Air. A MacBook Air is not a piece of garbage by any stretch of the imagination, and you can jack up the specifications of a MacBook Air according to your needs. The two, RAM, it's not like the old days. I know some people still make a big deal about RAM, and I guess if you're older and you're used to always having to take that into consideration with a screen reader, but realistically in this day and age, 8, 16, 32, whatever you can afford is fine. It doesn't really impact. VoiceOver does not use a lot of overhead when it comes to RAM. I mean, you can get away with 8 gigabytes just fine. I mean, I tend to go with 16, but that's because I am a little old school and I still have that little, sickness, I guess. Numerical numbers mean something and bigger is better kind of thing. But the one area I will really emphasize to people that you do want to consider is the size of the SSD, the solid state drive. Yes, in this day and age, I remember, let me put it this way. I remember back when, we were talking about megabytes. Oh, I got a 40 megabyte hard drive, and you were like styling and profiling. Now we're talking about terabytes. And the thing that's happened along with that is electronic hoarding capacities have increased, and so has our electronic hoarding file, collection, I guess you call it. So in other words, it doesn't seem, it's almost like no matter how big your hard drive is, you're eventually going to end up filling it. And, it's almost like, you move into a bigger house and you say, oh, I got a lot more room. It's not going to be cluttered. And then within 5, 10 years of living in that house, guess what? It tends to become cluttered. It's just, we have a capacity to fill our spaces, most people. So my point being that when you're looking at the size of your hard drive, quote unquote, your SSD, take that into consideration. You might say to yourself, yeah, it's 128. I can live with 128, or I can live with 256 gigabytes, but try to look at that realistically as far as a few years down the line. When you buy a Mac, people tend to hold on to Macs and Apple products a lot longer than PCs because, again, I'm speaking from personal experience here. I'm not looking to insult anybody, but Macs are made far more, they're durable and last longer than the average PC. You look at laptop prices, and yes, I'm never going to argue or debate anyone when they say, oh, Macs are so much more expensive. I can go out and I can buy a blah, blah, blah laptop with Windows 11 and blah, blah, blah for $350, $400, whatever. That's true. That's fine. And, a MacBook Air, I guess, bottom line is just under $1,000. And then obviously, if you start adding stuff to it, it's going to jack up the price a little bit. But you're getting the value of an Apple product. You're getting the durability. You're getting something that's going to hold its value a lot longer. And, I have heard people, and I've even looked at this myself on eBay. People will still sell MacBook Pros and even MacBook Air computers going back to 2017 and 2018, and they're still getting pretty top dollar. And they can price it at that because A, they're worth that, and B, they will get the money for that. Where a PC, I have a Lenovo, that one of my demonstration last PC before I got my Surface that I'm using now. My Lenovo is a 17-inch. I don't think that thing's worth $50 at this point. And it's probably, I would say, 6 or 7 years old. Where a Mac, of that same similar age is going to bring a lot more value, especially if you took care of that Mac. And it's just the feel that a Mac laptop has when you hold it, and you know, you really understand that there's quality involved in those, you know, in what Apple does when they make these computers. So MacBook Air, most average consumers is going to be able to get away with. MacBook Pro, higher, you know, more capacity, a better processor, et cetera, et cetera. Probably more for a professional. And I mean professional, I mean, what I mean by that is somebody who's going to do a lot more high-end work with their computer. They are going to do video rendering, audio rendering. Maybe they're going to, you know, they're going to be doing a whole lot of different types of processes going at the same time. It's not just a basic, you know, get on the internet and buy something from Amazon, or just check your mail or write a document here and there. You know, I'm speaking of somebody who really puts their computer through the paces, uses it every day, uses, you know, maybe they got 8 or 10 or 12 apps running at the same time. That's when you want to take a look at a more higher end, like a MacBook Pro. Now, as a blind person, I'm not going to get into a debate about screen size. I know that makes a difference for sighted people, and I know that will make a difference for some low vision people who have enough vision where that extra inch on the screen might make a difference to what they're able to see and do without the need for a screen reader. So that's really up to the individual as far as you know, screen size goes on a laptop, what they should decide, you know, to get in the end. You know, I know some blind people who are like sighted people, and that, you know, it's like I gotta have the best. So when the 16-inch came out, I know somebody that ran right out and got the 16-inch MacBook Pro, fully loaded, more memory up the wazoo, more RAM up the wazoo. And it wasn't like they needed it. They just wanted to have it so they could say they were using it, you know, and there are people like that. I mean, like I said, I know a lot of sighted people are like that, with, you know, with anything that comes out, cars, whatever. And when they buy a car, they got to get the car fully loaded with everything, you know, and there are just people like that with computers too. But as far as like, you know, obviously most blind people are, you know, either underemployed or unemployed. So you have a much different perspective in terms of what kind, you know, where you're going to put your money down and what you're going to spend it on. So, you know, to me, screen size is not necessarily a consideration unless it really needs to be a consideration for you. Now, as far as Mac desktop computers, you know, you have the Mac Mini, the Mac Mini Studio, you know, which is basically, it's like a box, a small box, and you can connect all your peripherals. If you need to get a monitor, you know, you can use a wireless keyboard, but you can connect external drives. You can connect whatever you need to it. And that's a very affordable Mac computer, and they're not a joke. I mean, they've really done a lot, especially with the M2 models now of the Mac Mini. It's really comparable to a desktop computer of any kind, you know, whether you go out and buy a Dell or a you know, HP or whatever the case may be. So you can't go wrong with a Mac Mini. You know, connecting a monitor is your call, I believe now, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is back differently from when I got my Mac Mini, my first Mac Mini in 2011. You needed to have a monitor connected, or at least trick the system into thinking it had a monitor connected, or you would have issues trying to run VoiceOver. I don't think that's the case now with the M1s, you know, the studios, etc. I don't think that's really the issue anymore. But, you know, you can get a wireless keyboard. You can get the Apple II Magic 2 keyboard. You can get yourself a USB connected if you'd rather have a wired keyboard. You know, you can use any Mac compatible keyboard with a Mac Mini. And then, you know, if you want to get a Magic trackpad, the trackpad 2 has the rechargeable batteries. If you're an iPhone user and you like your iPhone gestures, VoiceOver on the Mac does provide you with what is called Trackpad Commander. So you can utilize a lot of the VoiceOver gestures. In fact, you can customize gestures with VoiceOver on the Mac and add functionality that doesn't necessarily exist with the default layout of trackpad. and it gives you a bit more flexibility than you do even have on an iPhone with customization. So, again, it's just considerations that you want to take as a user. You have the iMacs, which are the all-in-one, the 27.5-inch. There's rumors that the M2 iMac is going to be released at some point this summer. At the moment, I believe it's just the M1s. That's my favorite machine. I had an iMac for several years, going back, I think, 2013, 2014, until it couldn't run the last couple of operating systems. So I ended up giving it to my brother, and then buying the 2019 Mac Mini that I'm using right now for this lecture. But iMacs all-in-ones, they are really slick now. They have a lot of connectivity to them. They have the monitor built into it. You can connect any array of different hard drives, etc. to
John,
it. Yes.
I can let you get away with one mistake, but not two. The iMac is actually now a 24-inch with the M1. The 27-inch they discontinued, and the Mac Mini that you call the Mac Mini Studio is actually called the Mac Studio, not the Mac Mini
It's
Studio.
still a Mac Mini. Come on. Let's be realistic here, White. Yes, that's right. The iMac is 24, right? They got rid of 27. My mistake. Geez, this is what happens when you have the peanut gallery involved here. Yeah, the Mac Studio, which is really just a jacked up Mac Mini. Come on, let's be realistic about it.
It is, and
It's
it's a great machine, and you'll probably you probably throw me in that category with getting more than I need. I actually got the one with 64 gigs of RAM, so
I was kind of thinking about you. But you aren't the person I was talking about. It's actually one of my friends up in Canada who bought, when the 16 Pro came out, he bought like everything, the highest end. I forget how many $1,000 the guy
I was
spent
about to
on
say that
his.
had to be somewhere near about $6,000,
Yeah,
right?
easily, and especially Canadian, So, but that's what he wanted. So, all right. So, like I said, and then you have the Mac Pros. I don't remember the last time the Mac Pro was updated. Do you remember, Clay? I don't know if I know there's
If I
rumors
remember,
they're
I
coming
think it
out with
was
a new one.
I think it's 18, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that. And again, that's really a computer if you're a high-end professional. Like you find like the video studios, the recording studios, the audio studios, they use Mac Pros because of the processor power and RAM. I don't know how much an average consumer is really going to need to do, as far as a Mac desktop goes, if you want to spend that kind of money, unless you need to. Again, I don't tell people how to spend their money. It's their money. They can lay it down any way they want. But I'm just trying to give you a realistic perspective. So, again, specifications for any of these Mac computers come down to you as A, what you can afford, and B, what you might need. I never mind answering people's questions about, what they should consider, how much is too much, how much is too little, when it comes to, SSD or RAM. So please, if you're kind of on the fence, because like I said, I know I have at least 6 or 8 people's names in this who registered for this course who I think I've encountered before. So if you're considering a Mac and you have questions, please do contact me to ask. I don't mind at all.
John.
No. Please wait till the end. Please
Okay,
wait.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, just if we can just wait for Q&A till the end, that will just make things easier. And, Cliff is assisting me. Cliff is a fellow trainer, and he can give some of his credential information at the end in terms of how to get in contact with him. So that's the reason why Cliff can come in and help me out here and editorialize with his know-it-all self. His helpful information. So here we come to Mac and Windows. And if you're considering jumping from Windows, I think that's a good thing. Now, again, let me just emphasize the point that I've been doing both. I've used both operating systems. I've been messing with JAWS 2023 and Windows 11, et cetera, et cetera. To me, the Mac and VoiceOver is a pleasure. Using Windows and JAWS is work. And I just find that I get entangled with too many screen reader related and operating system related issues that I'm battling anytime I got to use my PC. Now, I know one of the really weird psychological things that has happened, because it happened to me as a Windows user all the years prior to me jumping over to the Mac, you just become accustomed to it. You just get used to it. It's like, when you used to own the old TV sets that once in a while would go out and you just went over and smacked the side of it to get it to work again. And that just became a part of your daily ritual. And it's like PC people just get used to all the nonsense that they have to deal with that you don't realize is nonsense until you become a Mac user. And again, I'm not trying to be insulting. That's just the truth. I don't, as a Mac user, the only time I've had issues with the operating system and my screen reader is beta testing. My involvement with Apple, just as a side note, in case people are wondering who don't know me, I've been a trainer since 2010. I was a seller of assistive technology products for 18 years under Technologies for the Visually Impaired. I've been involved with Apple Accessibility, a relationship with Apple Accessibility since 2005. I'm a beta tester for both Mac and iOS and also iPad OS as part of the accessibility beta group. I've also been contracted directly with Apple for quality assurance on 2 different occasions. I've trained Apple employees to use VoiceOver on several occasions. I am an Apple certified support professional, an Apple certified trainer. I also teach the courses for ACSP for clients as well. Now that Apple has kind of changed the way they do things, it's now the Apple Device Management course. It's still the ACSP, but the course itself is called the Apple Device Management course. So just to kind of give you a background of where I'm coming from. So I switched totally to using a Mac probably around 2008, going from, being a Windows user, a Windows reseller of JAWS and all the Windows products back then, OpenBook, I was a Kurzweiler dealer, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, using a Mac is simply a pleasure. I enjoy it. I don't have to deal with all the stuff that I deal with as a Windows user. I've often heard some Windows people claim and say this to people who are considering making the jump. Oh, the Mac is so tough. The Mac is, you can't do blah, blah, blah on the Mac like you can do in Windows. Web browsing, for example. I often hear some Windows people love to spew to people who are considering jumping to a Mac. Oh, you can't browse Windows. You can't browse the internet in the same way as you can do with JAWS and Windows compared to Mac and VoiceOver. That to me is really a lot of nonsense. I'm not going to curse. Basically, my philosophy, I try to explain to clients as I train them, is you're only as good as your knowledge of your screen reader. So in other words, if you spend the time learning to use VoiceOver on the web, you learn how to content browse, you learn how to use quick nav, single key navigation, setting up web spots, you can browse as efficiently and as quickly with a Mac on the internet as you can in Windows. Whether you choose to use Safari, which is the Mac web browser, or you make a choice like Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox or the Brave browser, if you know how to use VoiceOver effectively, you can be just as efficient, just as quick, just as comfortable on the internet. The only factors is just what you deal with in Windows. It's the internet itself. As I often say to my clients, as a blind screen reader user, regardless of whether you're using Windows and JAWS or NVDA, or you're using Mac and VoiceOver, it's like going into the Amazon with a hand machete as your only tool. Because we deal with so many other factors as far as like developers making websites accessible to screen readers. That has nothing to do with VoiceOver Mac versus PC JAWS or whatever. That's just a reality we have to deal with. And you can look at websites. I do this all the time. I jump on websites from both perspectives to see, oh, maybe it's just going to work better in the Windows environment, or maybe it'll work better in the Mac environment. And that never really proves to be the case. Yeah, there are certain instances sometimes where you can do things a little bit, quote unquote, better with JAWS. Sometimes I find that I can do a few things a little bit better with VoiceOver in certain circumstances on specific websites. But if you take the average, so to speak, the standard deviation, whatever statistical term you want to use, it's 50-50 in my book from experience. If you know how to use your screen reader, you can be a very efficient and effective user. What happens, though, I think from personal experience, having trained people for the last 13 years, people forget what it was like learning Windows. And they have been Windows users for so long that when they get to learning the Mac, it seems to them a much more dramatic struggle because it is a new operating system and it's a new screen reader. So you're dealing with both of those factors. I remember Windows. I remember going from DOS to Windows, kicking and screaming. And it was not an easy time for me. It took me a very long time to get comfortable using Windows and understanding how to use Windows from the GUI perspective, the graphical user interface. And when I started using the Mac, and I self-taught myself because there were no trainers, there were no courses, there were no tutorials, there was nothing. We were a bunch of blind pioneers, so to speak, who had our own little group that would sort of exchange information back and forth. And that's how we learned to become Mac users. And back then with VoiceOver and Tiger, how long of a way it's come. It seems so rudimentary the way VoiceOver was back in 2005 compared to what it is now. To me, in 2023, I just think that VoiceOver is a comparable screen reader in every way, shape, or form than you're going to find in the Windows environment. The only shortcomings, obviously, is the fact that there are still some work environments, even though there's a policy in many places now that they call bring your own device, meaning that it doesn't matter whether you use a Mac or a PC as long as you can get the job done. And many of these places have to have IT staff that supports both Mac and Windows. Nevertheless, there still are some places that only, either you have to use Windows because that's the requirement, or they're using proprietary software on their computers that are not capable of being used on a Mac. Now, you can obviously, with Intel Macs, you can run Boot Camp, which is allowing you to run Windows as a separate separate partition, separate entity on a Mac. And you also can still use Windows on the Apple chip computers, the M1s and M2s, by way of virtualizing. I believe Parallels Desktop I think they're making it accessible from what I'm told. I don't know if there's a VMware Fusion version that runs well, but VMware Fusion was always the choice for virtualization on Intel Macs because of accessibility. So, there are ways around the Windows requirement, but my point is that there are still some workplaces that will say, oh, no, we only use Windows here. We only use this here type of thing. So, that's the only limitation you really have as a Mac user. I can tell you as a trainer, the number of Mac clients that I'm getting from state agencies that purchase Macs because of work, they're allowed. I've actually run into people who've told me their workplace only uses Macs because of the security. The one thing that you have to understand in this day and age with hackers and all kinds of nefarious people out there, security and privacy is a big deal. You find that with Apple products, you're going to have a lot more secure and safer and experience. When you meld iOS, iPhone, iPad into dealing also with a Mac, you have the confidence that you're using an environment that is not going to be easily hacked by anyone. When you're on a Mac, you're not worried about ransomware through emails. The only way that Macs can get affected, quote unquote, by malware is by way of third-party invitations. In other words, you use an application that has some way of getting malware to you. But even that, Apple is locking things down more and more through system integrity protection And now with their own, with the system on a chip, the M1s and M2 processors. So, if you want to get antivirus for your Mac, be my guest. If it makes you feel better, I'm never going to dissuade anybody from getting antivirus. I don't have it on my computer. I've messed with MacScan. I've messed with a few different antivirus programs on my Mac just for the sake of experience. But when it comes to the day-to-day usage of my Mac, I choose not to use an antivirus because, to me, the one thing I try to explain to people when you become a Mac user is as long as you are a smart user, in other words, you don't put your system password in to grant access to any application unless you absolutely understand why you're doing it. One of the biggest problems that some Mac people do find themselves getting into trouble with, and it's not so much an issue, I guess, for blind people, but is porn sites. A lot of time you go to porn sites and they have if you want to watch this video, you got to install the blah, blah, blah plugin. And meanwhile, the blah, blah, blah plugin is malware. So that sighted person who wants desperately to see the video just says, okay, I want to watch this. So they put their password in, and guess what? That's how you get malware on a Mac. It's really user wisdom, user just being vigilant, having an understanding of what you're doing on the Mac. And as long as you are a smart user, you don't have to deal with the 675,000 plus known viruses and malware that exists in the Windows world. And that's not an exaggeration. That's a number that I recently read in a PC World article. 675,000 plus known viruses and malware that exists for Windows over the years. So again, as an Apple person, if you're using an iPhone and an iPad, you already know that unless you've jailbroken, which I don't even know if you can still do that with iOS devices. I know they keep trying, but as long as you stay within the confines of getting your stuff through the Apple, the App Store for iPhone, iPad, on the Mac, you have the Mac App Store. You can still get third-party Mac apps, but as long as you follow, basic conventions and it's a notarized app, it's code signed by Apple, and otherwise it's recognized by Apple as an authentic, safe application to use, you're fine. So Dropbox, Zoom, Skype, and other applications that you can only grab from a third-party source on a Mac are still safe because Apple does recognize them as, safe applications that you can run. So you don't really have to, as I say to people, you can sleep better at night as a Mac user when it comes to the safety. And, and the other thing, Apple, I'm sure you've heard a million times, even if you're not an full-time Apple user yet, but Apple is big on privacy. I mean, Tim Cook has made statements many times about Apple's commitment to user privacy. As a trainer, getting my ACT, we had to really know a lot of the Apple privacy, the policies and what they do to protect users' privacy. In fact, if you study for the ACSP, which is now a combination of Mac and iOS, you have to learn all of the privacy features that are both available in the iOS and iPad OS world and in the Mac world. Where opposed to somebody like Google, who makes no bones about selling your personal information to sponsors, or Facebook, Meta, whatever term they're using these days. Even Amazon and Microsoft still do not have the privacy policies in place that Apple utilizes. Google just makes me laugh. It's one of the reasons, and again, this is personal opinion, and I'm not slamming Google because they do have a lot of great products that I do use, but I'm very careful about using Chrome and other Google products simply for that reason, that they are known and they don't make any apologies about abusing your privacy. So, again, just some things to consider if you are going to plan on, trying out a Mac. Now, one of the other cool things that you can do finally, as a Mac person or potential Mac person is when you go into an Apple store, you can actually try iPads, iPhones, Macs out as a blind person because VoiceOver is part of the operating system. It is not a bolt-on third-party product. It is developed and maintained and has evolved with Mac OS, going all the way back to Mac OS 10.4 Tiger, all the way up to the current version of Mac OS 13 Ventura. So with that being the case, you have stability and you have reliability of your screen reader, and you have the constant advancement, contrary to some of the nonsense that you sometimes read in blogs by Apple bashers out there. I still get a kick once in a while when people on some of the email lists put a link to a blog article or something and say, oh my God, this is going to ruin Apple. And I read these things and go, this is just from somebody with an axe to grind or is really uneducated when it comes to knowing what the state really is. Opinions, to quote Clint Eastwood, trying to say this in a very polite way, opinions are like a certain part of the body. Everybody has them and most of them stink. And that really comes to be the truth when you read a lot of the garbage online that is written by people on their blogs. I remember way back when VoiceOver first came out in OS 10.4, and there was an article written by a gentleman, quote, from the American Foundation of the Blind back then. And it was this article that said all these things, claimed all these things that VoiceOver did and Macs did not contain, including a spell checker. And it's like, this is somebody who never even turned on a Mac trying to write an informative article about a product they've never used before. So the point is don't believe everything that you read. Try out a Mac, try out VoiceOver, and do it open-minded. Some advice as if you're planning on switching, you want to throw your Windows mindset out the window, no pun intended. You can't think Windows, you can't think JAWS when you're trying to learn to use a Mac and VoiceOver. Are there some parallels? Absolutely. When I teach people who come over from Windows, I try to find terms and, features or whatever that relate, so for example, I'll try to tell people, the VoiceOver, VoiceOver function key 2 is the equivalent of doing insert T in the Windows world. Place markers in JAWS are pretty much the same as what web spots are in VoiceOver in Safari or, whatever browser you choose to use. So I do try to find some, parallels between the operating systems and screen readers just to give a Windows, whether it's a former quote unquote Windows user or somebody who plans on straddling both worlds, I try to give them some reference points to help them understand, the concept that, or, what you're doing with the Mac. What I've done is I'm sharing my screen, so to speak, so you can hear VoiceOver's audio. So for those of you not familiar, this is what's called the Alex voice. This is usually the default voice, though sometimes you do have to download it and you start off. My understanding from a lot of the new Macs is the Samantha voice, from the iPhone world. But this is the speech that Apple specifically has developed. This is their baby, so to speak, called Alex. And it happens to be I think is still amongst the best speech quality. Yes, I know some people with JAWS finally got their wish where you have the JAWS voices available now. You can choose read and all those voices. I forget what the heck they're even called. I'm telling you, man, I'm getting old. But you can do that if you like. But the voice you're going to be hearing is the Alex voice right now. So I am in Zoom, but I'm going to switch windows here just to kind of
text edit. Text edit.
So you have a basic word processor called TextEdit. This is not WordPad. This is not Notepad in Windows. This is a full-blown word processor. It just doesn't have the bells and whistles that you might find in a Pages or a Microsoft Word version of Mac, for Mac. And by the way, Office for Mac, whether you use Word or Excel or PowerPoint, is accessible with VoiceOver. So that another myth that still seems to be bandied about, that, oh, if you have to use Office on your Mac, you're not going to have accessibility. That's nonsense. And it's been nonsense for at least 4 or 5 years. I believe 2016, actually, Office 2016 for the Mac was the first version that was accessible with VoiceOver. But TextEdit is my word processor of choice for my everyday usage. And it's usually when I teach people working with text, I use that as a starting point unless the client specifically needs or requests a different word processor. So I do have sometimes college students who are using Word exclusively for their classes because it's required. So then, I will start with Word and teach them from the Word perspective. But for my regular clients, I usually start as TextEdit and then work my way to any other word processor that they might need.
Zoom.u messages, 2 new items.
So you have the Messages application, which is really the extension of the Messages application in iOS. So you can literally do your text messages, whether it's through another Apple user, iPhone user, or even Android. You can, as long as you have call forwarding turned on your iPhone, you are able to communicate with them by way of the Mac. So in other words, you don't have to pick up your phone to reply to texts or, compose text messages, etc. Since I sit at my Mac for all of my training, it's a really handy dandy way to, respond to either client text or friends and family.
Text at Zoom.u mail, 4 new items.
You have Apple Mail, which is kind of the equivalent of, I guess you'd say it's Outlook or Windows Mail, whatever. If you're used to using a Windows Mail client, it is really the same principle. You have a message list. You have mailboxes that Apple calls mailboxes. I know Outlook calls them folders. It's the same principle here. One thing I will point out about Apple Mail that is different than what you'll find in Outlook is what are called the unified mailboxes. You cannot do this in Outlook, where you have a unified or all inboxes, which is basically a consolidation. If you have multiple email accounts, you have one inbox that shows all of your incoming mail for everything. So it makes it very easy to have a centralized place to see all of your incoming mail. So I have 7 different email accounts for different reasons. So I can see all my email in one inbox. But if I wanted to, when you learn to use VoiceOver and Apple Mail, you can set it up so that you can have quick access to other mailboxes by way of what's called the favorites bar. So it really gives you a lot of the features that you have in Outlook. But it's a lot, in my opinion, a lot more robust in what you can possibly do. And you can get, third-party applications, plugins for mail to give you even greater functionality.
Messages, text edit, Zoom.calendar, 2 new.
You have your calendar. Yes, it's a separate app. I know Outlook has the built-in contacts, calendars, etc. With Apple, with the Mac, you have a separate calendar app, but it syncs with all of your Apple devices. So as long as you're logged into the same Apple ID on your Mac, your iPhone, your iPad, etc., whatever changes you make to your calendar, additions, subtractions, etc., that will show up across all your devices. Same thing with contacts. It's called contacts on the Mac. It used to be called many moons ago. If those old enough or Mac users remember it as simply being called address book. It's been contacts for a while now. So it's just like any other, application you would find in Windows for maintaining your address book. You have all your contacts, and again, they can sync over to all your different Apple devices. You have the music app, which formerly was called iTunes. It switched over a couple of operating systems ago, where Apple sort of subdivided what used to be included. So you have a separate podcasts app, a separate TV app, you have the music app. So, it's just that now music specifically deals with only music. It's not an all-in-one like when you connected your iPhone to a Mac years ago, you would use the iTunes app as your platform for, your intermediary to back up your iPhone. It's not done that way. It's actually done through what is called Finder. And Finder is the equivalent of the File Explorer realm in the Windows operating system. So Finder is how you explore your folders and your files. It is a different experience for sure. It's not layered in the same way that if you're used to using a Windows PC and going through your folders and files by hitting enter on this, hitting enter on that. You can use what is called list or column view, which to me makes more sense and gives, I think, the user a much better overall perspective of how their folder and file hierarchy exists as a user. So that's called Finder. Safari is the browser. Let me see
Mail,
if I
messages,
have-
text, Zoom, Find, Safari, Calendar, right.
So we have
https://studio.youtube.com/channel/ub, writer help, voice stream.
So I'm just kind of cycling through windows that I have currently open in Safari. Just like in the PC world, you can have multiple browsing windows open simultaneously. I have some stuff I've been working on. I have a client who's using VoiceStream Writer, so I have the writer help. I was helping somebody with YouTube stuff, so I have a YouTube window still open.
https://www.audiovault.net.
I have Audio Vault because I had another client that was interested in Audio Vault earlier today, so that site is still open. So you can have multiple websites open just like you can do in any browser. This is Safari, but again, if you're really not married, you don't want to be married to one browser, you can use Google Chrome, you can use Firefox. I know a lot of people are using the Brave browser and really speaking very highly of it. There used to be something called Lightning, which was a very accessible web browser that was, I guess when I first started using the Mac the first few years, it was like the alternative browser that people were using to Safari. I don't know if it's still being supported by the developer anymore, but just to give you an idea that you have more than one choice for web browsing. And as a side note, as for Mail, Apple Mail, I don't know about accessible alternatives to Apple Mail. I've never bothered to really care because Mail does everything that I need it to do. And I kind of get a chuckle out of people who say that Mail is not accessible or that Calendar is not accessible. Go get yourself something else. I think if you spend enough time and understand what it is you're looking at, everything on the Mac is fully accessible. You don't need to go out and get third party this, third party that to get your job done. That's my opinion, though. Again, I don't try to tell people how, what apps they should or shouldn't use. I'm just telling you from a logical user standpoint of someone who learned this stuff from scratch and didn't have alternatives. You just learned to use what you had and it works just fine. Do I have anything else? Well, Zoom, obviously.
Calendar,
Let me
mail,
just
for
see.
messages, text edit, zoom.u, Finder, Safari, Calendar, 2 new, mail, 4 new
Those are
items,
the ones I have
mail, all
open
inbox.
at the moment. But we'll go to the dock here. The dock is kind of like it's kind of like a quick launch toolbar in the Windows world. But the dock contains, it's visually this bar that by default is across the bottom of a Mac screen. And it's got shortcut icons horizontally that come with the computer, but you can customize and you can add and subtract anything that you feel you do or do not want on the dock. So
Doc. Zoom.us. Books, 31 of 38. Yurufukiru, 30th. Skype, 29 of. Activity Monitor, 28 of. DokuScan Plus, 20. Text Edit, Open. Disk Utility, 25. Terminal,
well,
24.
I'm just kind of navigating along my dock just to kind of let you hear the different applications that are available. Some of these apps are built into the operating system, like Disk Utility, Activity Monitor. They're more for disk management, processor management as, a support person, you use activity monitor to troubleshoot issues that people might be having with applications, etc. But we have other apps like DocuScan Plus.
Disk
What else do
utility,
I have
text edit,
here?
DocuScan Plus, activity monitor, Skype, 20, Yarufu Kiru,
Skype is obviously a third-party
Skype,
app.
Yarufu Kiru,
I don't think this one works anymore. It was a Twitter application. I'm not sure because I know when Twitter made changes to their API that some of these third-party Twitter apps stopped working.
Books, 31 of
Books is if you're an iPhone user, you also have this app, and that's another thing too. A lot of those apps on your iPhone, you're going to find there are Mac versions as well. So if you're used to using an app in one environment, chances are you're going to find it on the Mac, and there's going to be syncing involved. So in other words, what books and stuff you deal with on your iPhone are going to be honored on the Mac version of Books. If you have the TV app and you use it on your iPhone, well, guess what? Your watch list and everything else is going to come up on the Mac TV app. As long as you have everything syncing, you should be able to use all your apps in both environments.
Zoom.us, Shrook, 33 of 30, Mail, all in.
Okay, so just to give you an idea again, that there are also a lot of, third-party Mac apps that you can get through the Mac App Store if you have a specific task that you need to accomplish. There are Mac versions in some instances of applications that you might have gotten known and loved on the PC, or there are comparable applications. In other words, it may not be the same application that you were used to using in Windows, but it still does the same job that you were using it for in Windows. And the other thing I've kind of discovered, and maybe this has changed a little bit through the Microsoft Store, I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time, buying stuff through the Microsoft Store. But in the past, it always seemed to me that purchasing Mac applications were a lot less expensive compared to buying Windows applications. I don't know why that's the case, but, purchasing Mac apps for like a couple of dollars, $9, maybe $19 was a lot different from the days of buying stuff for 70, 80, 90, $100+ in the Windows world. And I can't tell you how many Windows apps I ended up buying years ago that were not fully accessible and were utter wastes of money. One of the things I try to explain to people, it's the same thing I say about Mac apps as iOS apps. You really want to make sure you're getting something that's accessible. If it's a free app, you're wasting your time. You're not wasting your money. But, you don't want to buy an app that's not accessible. And the cool thing, though, always that if you do end up buying an app that turns out not to be usable with VoiceOver, you have the ability to get your money back from Apple. If you explain to them that you're a blind VoiceOver user, they will refund you the money when you explain that it's not compatible with VoiceOver.
April 11th, 1:56 p.
So, VoiceOver is, as I said, the screen reader. You have a VoiceOver utility.
Opening VoiceOver utility.
That allows you to control and customize VoiceOver. So in other words, what you get out of the box, you're not stuck with. You have all kinds of different things that you can change when it comes to VoiceOver. So if you don't like the voice that comes with it, if you don't like the way it reads text, you don't like the way it works on the web, if you're a Braille display user, you basically can just plug your Braille display in literally through a USB port or connect it via Bluetooth. You don't need special drivers for your Braille display. It just works. So the VoiceOver utility gives you a lot of customization. You also have additional add-on features called the commanders. I mentioned Trackpad Commander earlier. It's one of the commanders in the VoiceOver utility.
Speak the following utility category. In utility
so I'm just going to kind of go
verbosity, speech, navigation, web, sound, visuals, commanders, Braille, activities, VoiceOver recognition.
So these are just like the 11 categories, the major categories for the VoiceOver utility. And each of these categories is either going to have just a bunch of preferences that you can change, or in some instances, they may have subcategories, that you can access as well. So the overall picture is that it gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of different things that you can do to customize and make VoiceOver work in a way that is appealing to you. I will be doing a course later on in the spring that specifically focuses on using the VoiceOver utility, how to make changes to it, what the commanders are, what activities are, VoiceOver recognition. So I will go into far more depth when we cross that particular bridge later on. But just to give you an idea that it's a very easy utility to call up with a keyboard command. You also can very easily navigate it. That's the thing too I do like about using the Mac and VoiceOver. Everything is really a lot more intuitive and straightforward. You're not having to necessarily go through hoops to make changes to VoiceOver. And that also comes down to the system itself. So I'm just going to quit out
Mail. All
of the VoiceOver utility here. And I'm going to just talk briefly about system settings. So, in the PC world, you go through system, you go through all these different things, the device manager, etc. Finding out what version of Windows you use and all that stuff is just a pain in the neck. It's just not straightforward. With a Mac, you open up system settings, and it's now, as of Ventura, a very similar layout to the iPhone.
System settings. Appearance. Window. Table. In table. Appearance.
So,
Level 1. Row 1. John Panarese. Apple
so you
ID.
have your Apple ID
Row
at the
37.
top, just like you do, in the iOS world that has all your Apple and iCloud, settings and preferences, etc. So I'm just going to work my way through the system settings just to show you how straightforward. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth,
network.
Your network. This is a little different because the Mac obviously has more network options. If you're using, a VPN, if you're using what's called Thunderbolt Bridge, you can have a Mac that runs with Ethernet if you have direct connect to your modem. So the network settings give you some additional network features.
Notifications.
Sound. Focus, which is just the new, just like an iOS for do not disturb.
Screen time.
General. Appearance. Now, general, just like in the iOS world, gives you the software updates. You also have the about. So if you need to learn, you want to know what version of Mac OS you're running, that's one way you can find out about it. You don't have to do any copying and then having to paste it into a document to find out what version of your operating system you're running. I'll show you another quick way you can find out. You simply go to the menu
bar, Apple,
and under the Apple menu you have
Apple menu, about this Mac.
Now, about this Mac is a summary of everything you would need to know should you ever find yourself needing to communicate with an Apple customer service, tech support person who might ask you what kind of Mac you're using, what's the current operating system version, your serial number.
About this Mac. System information. Image. Mac Mini. 2018.
So I'm just going to kind of explore if I ever needed to talk to an Apple support person.
Processor. 3.6 gigahertz quad-core Intel Core i3. Graphics. Intel UHD graphics 631,536 megabyte. Memory. 16 gigabytes 2667. Startup disk. Macintosh HD. Serial number. C07YT0X. Mac OS. Ventura 13.4.
So you see, right there in this window gives me all the information I need. I don't have to jump through hoops to try to find out what version. I mean, the other day I was trying to help my brother figure out what version of Windows 11 he was running. And I had to look it up on the internet because I couldn't find exactly, and everything was copied to clipboard basically. So I basically had to hit the button to copy it, go in to open up a Microsoft Word document, paste it so I could read what version of Windows I was using. Kind of stupid in my opinion. Unless there is another way that I am not aware, that seems to be the only way you can do it from a screen reader standpoint. But here you go, right in the About This Mac window, you
more
have
info
all
button.
Your details, and then the More Info button here gives you more detailed information about your Mac. Again, if a customer service person or a tech support, Apple Care person asks you specific questions, you have it very easy at your fingertips to come up with that information for them.
Appearance window.
Okay, so I'm just going to
Quit system. Mail.
So everything is very easy. You have an applications folder on your Mac. You don't have EXEs in the Mac world like you do in Windows. You have applications that you can launch either from the dock. You can use commanders to set up keyboard shortcuts if you wish. You have what's called the Spotlight search feature. So you can just type the name of an application and it's usually the first result that comes up and you can launch it right from the Spotlight window. So there's a lot of ways from an accessible standpoint that you can get to your applications. You can put things if you really, really, truly wanted to on your desktop. You can clutter your desktop all you want, like some people do in Windows. I don't particularly advise it, and I try to explain to my clients why that's not the best idea in the world, and that there's other alternatives to putting stuff on your desktop than actually putting items on your desktop. But again, you can do virtually everything on a Mac that you can do on a PC. So, that's really the gist here. I'm not trying to, again, get into a firefight over what's better, quote unquote. From a teaching standpoint, again, for me personally, again, and this is just my opinion, I find teaching Mac and VoiceOver a lot easier in terms of the learning process with my clients compared to having to teach them JAWS and Windows together. That is just a challenge. And I often find myself really just trying to keep things a lot simpler. And when I'm teaching Windows and JAWS, I can do a lot more with an average client when it comes to the Mac and VoiceOver, as far as what I can get them to understand and do.
Carol joined this channel.
Easier than doing it in Windows and JAWS, just from my experience. Again, I've been in this industry since 1992, just to give you an idea. So 30 years plus and going still. And that's just, again, this is I've formulated from my own opinion over the years. But I will definitely, if people ask me flat out, I'm going to recommend a Mac and VoiceOver over a PC and Windows and JAWS any day of the week, unless again, it's a specific circumstance and situation that requires that you have to use a Windows PC. But if you have that choice and the freedom to choose, I think you're going to do much better with a Mac and using VoiceOver in the long run. And you'll find that as time goes on. You're going to have to get over the initial bumps in the road and the sort of stop and go-ness that happens when you're learning something in the beginning. But as long as you keep that into perspective and think back to how it was learning Windows, and you just equate it to the same learning process, you stay the course and you'll become a really good Mac and VoiceOver user. I mean, I think Cliff can certainly speak from his own experiences coming over from Windows, that we really don't look back. And I envy Cliff in the sense that he really only has to use Windows to a limited degree compared to the fact that I still have to teach it to people. So with that being said, I will now open the floor.
Of course, I'm coming from the Linux world, and we haven't talked about Linux at all. I never see any tutorials about coming from Linux to Mac, so that would be a challenge. I guess Linux obviously is quite similar
It's
to
kind of a similar, I mean, if you use Linux, you would probably love the Mac command line.
Yeah,
You would probably use the same tools, I would guess, if you needed
yeah,
to.
right. I'll tell you what I wouldn't mind doing, although I don't know how it would probably be very difficult, would be to use the Mac voices with a Linux screen reader on the Mac. I'll tell you, to be honest with you, you seem to like Alex. Alex sounds very spliced and segmented. You'd be much happier with Allison. I think that's a much nicer experience to listen to. And I was going to ask you and your friend, are there Macs that come with a graduated built-in keyboard?
What do you mean by, I mean, the Mac laptops have the keyboard for sure.
No, I know that. I have a High Sierra that I got from my Linux guy for $35, and you can only update it so far. But it's got a flat keyboard, and I'm used to keyboards that kind of slope up as you go higher on the up toward the F1 through F12 row. They get higher.
Well, the keyboard that I use, the Apple Magic 2 has that. It's a slope. So,
Oh,
you can feel that at the bottom edge, it's very thin and it slowly moves up to a thickness, and the keyboard kind of rises each row of the keys to the keyboard. And
No, most Mac laptops are flat, and that's what I'm used to. I try not to bash Windows because I have to use it every day for work. But I kind of use the Apple Logitech line because they're made similar and everything's at the same level, which is the way that I like it. I tend to bump keys when they're kind of a step layout, for lack of a better term. As they rise higher, the next row is higher. I kind of don't like that because, I mean, like John, I mean, I'm not a vet like he is, but I'm pretty close. I've been using a Mac since 2010. All the way. I think my first operating, I was on Tiger for like a week, John, and then they upgraded, then they introduced Snow Leopard. So, but yeah, I tend to
April
like the
11th,
flatter
2,
keyboards
10
myself
p.m.
personally. So.
yeah. And lastly, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. My biggest challenge, I think, if I ever get to learn a Mac, is the fact that so many things like the Chromebook are three keystrokes at one time, and I guess you can make it two, and that's a bit
you
better.
do have ways to work around. You have the numpad commander if you have a full-size keyboard. You have the keyboard commander. You have trackpad commander, and there's probably third-party apps that you could probably run. But remember, Windows and JAWS has a bazillion keyboard combinations too. It's when you're using a screen reader, you got to remember that traditionally, quote unquote, screen readers are keyboard driven systems.
Mhm.
So you're going to have key combinations. So it doesn't matter whether you use JAWS, NVDA, Mac VoiceOver, you're going to have keyboard combinations.
One
Game
thing the
one.
Mac does that Windows doesn't do, John, in the single key letter navigation on Safari, we can push L for links on Safari, but we can't push L for links on Windows. You got to go to that stupid insert F7, which I hate.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, when I had to go back to using Windows to teach, it was like, it was just like made me appreciate my Mac and what I deal with VoiceOver. I mean, again, I'm not trying to bash it. It's a different experience. I guess if you're used to it and you deal with it every day, it's like anything else. You just don't think about it. But for me, I just find that the Mac, again, teaching people, it's easier. It's easier in the long run. All right, Cliff, why don't you give your information? Because I'm going to have to get going here shortly. So, people interested in getting in touch with Cliff and what he's got going on, why don't you let people know? Are you still there, Cliff?
Well, my website is
there you go.
stirredup.com, which is STURITUP.com. And my email address is pretty much the same as support@stirredup.com. And if you go to my Stirred Up webpage, there is a free resources page where John's podcast and YouTube page is both listed, as well as podcast and training that me and my buddy, well, me and John's friend, buddy Matt Baldbridge does over at ttjtech.net. So yeah, to get a hold of me, it's support@stirredup.com, and stir is spelled with a U, and as well as podcasts and other free resources that you can find on the page.
This is the thing I want people to also understand about the Mac environment. We are all trainers, but it's not a competition cutthroat thing. We're a community. We help each other out. We've been around, we kind of learned this stuff together, and you help each other out, and everybody learns differently, and you learn stuff from one person. Other people's perspectives are different. I always want people and advise people to try to learn from as many different resources as possible, because you're going to pick up things that one person may not have covered, or one other person might find more important to teach than another. So I'm always pushing Cliff and Matt because they do so many cool things with the courses they run. And it's just definitely worth your time to check Cliff out and check Matt out, and learn from them as well. So until next time, take care.
Remember, For all Mac, iOS, and any kind of Apple training, visit macfortheblind.com. John Panarese has some free courses and some reasonable paid courses. You won't be disappointed. See you next time.